tell us when you first became involved in the Church of the Ascension, and I know you were the first parish secretary, but tell us about that early time, how you got involved, and what it was like to be being involved in the church at the very beginning.
Well, we had been living in South Carolina. Before we moved there, we were members of St. Gregory's. When we came back, we went to register at St. Gregory's, and they said, oh no, there's a new parish forming. So they gave us the name and the telephone number, and we called and found out where Mass was. And at that time, it was at Kempsville Elementary School. We went to Mass the first day, and when we walked in, there was Father Bob French at the door, who had been a classmate of mine at Catholic High. And so we chit-chatted a little bit, small talk, and then of course he had to ask me what I did, what my husband did, what all the children did. He wanted everybody to know, wanted to know what everyone did. Tried to involve them in the youth group, the folk group as it were, not the youth group. We had a youth folk group at the time. And my youngest daughter did get involved in that. But anyway, so that was how we came to be at Ascension. And in those days, no one was anonymous at Ascension. Everybody was expected to do something. Ministries, he called them. That was the beginning of the ministry program. So even a telephone call was a ministry. Everything was a ministry. So everyone was involved. We had to be. We had no funds starting out, so we had to depend on the parishioners to set everything up. And I mean, he had a station wagon, and everything was carried to the school in the station wagon and set up and tried to make it as much like a church or a chapel as he possibly could, a sanctuary. And that's how we got involved. That's how we started. As I said, we had no paid help. And when he found out I had administrative skills, he asked me if I could help in the office a couple of days a week. And so I did. I came in a couple of mornings a week just to help get the Mass programs and the bulletin together and whatever. And so that was my very beginning. We had an old offset press that someone had donated. We had a mimeograph machine, if anybody knows today what those are. And that is what we used, and everything was done in the office. All the Mass programs, all the bulletins, everything. We typed them up, we ran them off, we did the whole thing. And then later on, it worked into a paid position, and I put in a few more days a week. So that was my very beginning.
There have to be lots of challenges to starting a new parish. Can you tell us a little bit about that, challenges, as well as the joys of being at the beginning of something?
The challenges were, I guess, convincing people that they needed to be involved, that they couldn't just come to church. And his favorite phrase was gas station Catholics to come and fill up and leave. Everybody had to be a part in order for us to function.
What were some of the other jobs that people did?
Well, setting up for Mass, for example. That was quite a chore. Taking care of the books, the finances, all that, counting the money, getting the money in. The joys were very rewarding because people worked very closely together. And that was the beginning of community, I think, that we pulled together and we made it happen. So that was, I would say, probably the joys. And when we'd have socials, they were not money-making socials. The purpose of a social was to create community. And that put a whole different perspective on it. And those socials, I think, brought more people to the Catholic faith than anything I've ever witnessed.
Explain that a little more. why were those socials such a magnet for the church?
Because there was no pressure. We didn't think, oh, you've got to make X number of dollars, or, and everybody got involved. You had to be involved. One of them was, and we talked about this before, the Oyster Rose Crab Feast, which was my favorite. And that was a 2-night event because Tommy and Donna Brewer lived across the street, and Donna would empty out her refrigerator. And on Friday night, we would get together and we would cook the crabs. And we'd eat a few of them too. And then we put them in her refrigerator, and they stayed in there overnight. And then the next night, someone would go get the oysters, and everything was set up outside here on the grounds, and they would roast the oysters and crack them open and all the stuff you do with oysters, and bring out the crabs, and people would just sit around and eat and just laugh and have fun. And my husband was not Catholic at the time, and I honestly believe that's what pulled him in. And they would, just talk, and like I said, there was no pressure. There was no big setup. There was no big rush to get it done. There was no set amount of money we were trying to make. It was just to be together.
It's been said that Ascension has its own unique character. Maybe you just described it, I don't know. But how would you describe to a stranger what Ascension is all about?
I think it is definitely the community. I mean, it's taken on a different look now because we're so much bigger, for one thing. And the challenges are different. Like I said, the socials now are events, and it requires a lot more. But it's also a different time now, too. And like I said, there are different ways to bring people together. For example, we didn't have the building, and when we got the building, the contractor said to us, French wanted to be in it by Easter. And the contractor said, no, can't get it done, we got to paint, we got to do this. He said, we're going to get it done. So what do? They bring in hot dogs and hamburgers and call the community in, and we spent many an afternoon and night in this place painting the walls, which was cinder block at the time, concrete floors. We couldn't afford carpet. So I remember it was like a rock of some sort, and it's what we scraped the paint up off the concrete floors with. And like I said, my husband was a Catholic at the time, and one of the stories is he was laying upstairs on his back painting the railings, and this young man was laying next to him doing the same thing, and he said, I don't know why I'm here, I'm not even a Catholic. And my husband looked at him and said, neither am I, and he just kept going. And so I think that's it. I think it's the community, the people coming together, and they still do it. They just do it in different ways. And we are bigger, so you can't have that intimacy, I think, that we had back then.
Helen, tell us about the impact of this parish, this church, on your own spiritual development, whether it's been the masses, the people, the community. What's impacted you the most?
I guess I would have to say all of it. I grew up in old church, Latin Mass, so on. Went to Catholic schools, knelt on concrete floors and all that. And I wasn't accustomed to seeing the priest's face, his back was always to us and so on. All of that turned around with Vatican II. And this building was constructed to reflect Vatican II. I think Father French pulling us in as he did, and people becoming a part of it. And I got involved in RCIA, I did the confirmation program. A lot of the adult faith programs. That was another thing Father French liked, was training the laity. We made many trips, which the parish paid for. We paid part and they paid part. We went to Charlotte to a liturgical conference, a number of us. We went to Georgetown University for a week, a number of us. Well, not the whole parish, of course, but groups, people who were involved in various things. And he really believed in that, and he made it happen. He made sure there were funds to train his lay leaders, as he called them. I always referred to him as a great enabler. And we used to joke because he would always say, if he had to do anything, my hands are consecrated. And we'd all laugh. And the reason behind that was, I'm not going to do it, you're going to do it. And people had a love-hate relationship with him, I think, because of that, including myself. There were times when we would get really upset with him about things. But in hindsight, you could see what he was doing. And I think all of that, having those opportunities to learn as a layperson and become more involved. And we had a nun at the time, Sister Eileen, who was in charge of our religious ed program. And she said to me, I had a daughter who was in high school, one who was in junior high, and she said, you have children that age, why don't you, I need an 8th grade teacher, why don't you come and to the orientation classes or the learning sessions? And I said, oh, no, sister, I don't know enough about my faith. I could never do that. She said, well, maybe you could be an assistant. Well, next thing I knew, I was teaching 8th grade religion. So, they would just suddenly bring you in, and before you knew it, you were there. But those are the things I think that really helped me grow in my faith. And the RCIA program, for people who have not sponsored, it benefits the sponsor as much as it does the individual you're working with.
You touched on, you're doing great, by the way. You touched on the building of the parish,
yes.
The church, and how it reflected Vatican II. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how the architecture of this church does reflect Vatican II?
Well, in the beginning, we didn't have the chapel. We did not have the, what do we call it, ACC. We didn't have those. And those were all add-ons later. So we had a multifunctional building. The Eucharist was kept in, we had, I won't say like a chapel, but we had a space in the house with the tabernacle. So it wasn't present in the building itself. So you felt free to just come in and do. And we would hold all kinds of functions in the building, like parties and dances and all of that. Just rearrange your furniture. And that's why everything on the altar was movable, so it could be taken off. They did not use statues, which, the older churches were all used to all this ornate architecture and statues and things of that nature. This was designed to make the church the people, not the building. So we are the church, not the building. So that was the reason for not having all of the statues and all of the ornate decorations that so many of our older churches have.
Was there a group of parishioners who came up with this, with the design, with the
idea?
So it came from the ground up, sort of?
Oh, yeah.
It's not an architect that developed it for you, but the parishioners?
No, the parishioners did it. Well, to begin with, we had a building fund. When the building fund worked in a way, they did bring in a professional to help us with that because we had never done it and didn't know what the heck we were doing. Every parishioner had an X number of cards, and I can't remember now how many, pledge cards. We were responsible for contacting that number of people and trying to get pledges. Well, and then we had a party at the golf course across the street. And Norb and I sat there, and everybody everybody brought in their pledge cards. And we sat there, and I called them out and Norb counted them. I called them out and Norb counted them. So at the end of the night, it was like an election almost. But we had a party, so everybody was having a good time. And that's how we got the funds to get started. Then we had a building committee. Ralph Horton was the chairperson of that building committee, and there were numerous people that were on it. And I would say most of them are gone now. They are, unfortunately. But they sat with Father French and came up with the plans. And then they presented them to council, and they got together on it. And every so often we'd have a 5-year plan meeting and try to say, where do you want to be in 5 years? And of course we wanted to have a building. And so anyway, long story short, they did all that. And then they found a contractor who had done other churches. Hoy was his name. And he became like a friend to the parish. He was popping in and out all the time, and everybody knew him. And in fact, Mike Hanna had a heart attack, and he and French were up, I think, I want to say Rhode Island, attending the first Mass of a newly ordained priest. And Mike Hanna had a heart attack. Well, when he was able to travel, Mr. Hoy flew his private jet up there and brought him back. And so that's how good a friend he was to the parish.
Okay. What else?
Is there anything that you think we haven't asked you that you'd like to share?
It's
About the early leaders, maybe a little bit more about Father French and how they helped shape this parish at the time.
Well, as I mentioned, Ralph Horton was in charge of the building committee. We had a finance committee that was headed up by, there were 2 people. It was Noel Kurzak and Tony Sievers. And our liturgy committee consisted of Maureen Iannucci and Weedy Armstrong. Well, they were the leaders of it, more or less. And it was all sort of combined. Parish council, we had a gentleman by the name of Dick Kao, who was the chairperson of that. And of course, I mentioned earlier Tommy and Donna Brewer, who you wouldn't consider, they didn't have titles. Well, Tommy kind of did. They used to call him the mayor of Kempsville. But all of those people coming together helped really to form this parish. And they were very unique people, each in their own right, and very talented. Ralph knew all about architecture and business and all those sort of things, but he had a way about him. He would call the parish and he'd say, well, hello, sweetheart. It's kind of a Humphrey Bogart type of person. But that's how he got things done. He knew how to sugarcoat them. And as I said again, they were all very unique people and made it happen. No one was paid. As I said, we had no money. So everybody, once we got into the building, if it needed to be clean on Saturday morning, we had a cleaning party. And everybody showed up. Same with the grounds. We made some mistakes, a lot of mistakes, I guess, but it survived and it's gotten better. And we've had 3 building pledges that I can remember. We had first the original one. Then we had one where we added the chapel. And then we had one where we added the ACC. Well, actually, it wasn't a building campaign at the time, but then we added the pantry, the social ministry offices. So now we're getting ready for another one. I said to I've been married twice. Both husbands are deceased. My first husband's name is on that door, and the second husband's name is in the columbarium on the bricks. So I don't know about this one, but I know the younger people will get it done. So at my age, I don't know how much I have left to give, but But I do keep the parish in prayer and the
Sounds like the
people
Holy
involved
Spirit
in
was
it.
really working in those early days with
It
bringing all the
was.
right people to the right jobs.
It definitely was. And Father French, as I said, was a very unique individual. He knew how to motivate people. He knew how to educate them. He went through a doctorate program and included, I think there were maybe 10 or 12 of us in the program with him. So every time he would go to Richmond for training or classes, and he would come back and we would meet, and he would share that with us. So he made sure that the parishioners were involved in every avenue of the parish.
Sounds like he was the right person at the right time.
He certainly was. As I said, most of us had a love-hate relationship with him. But in hindsight, that changed a lot.
Maybe it was because he was so demanding. Was that the hate part of
He
it?
didn't do it demand. It's difficult to say. He would just suggest things that we didn't agree with. He was very, what do I want to say? He looked to he had a vision of the future, which most of us did not have, coming from old church. And he made it happen. And sometimes we didn't agree with what he wanted to do or the way he was going to do it. We had a retreat one time down at the beach, and we got so angry with him, everybody came back very unhappy. So he called together a meeting to reconcile all this, and that happened. But because of some of the things he was proposing that we were going to do in the parish, and we're going, no, you're not.
Is that because they were new and different and?
Yeah, some of them, yeah, and some of them we thought you just couldn't do. And he didn't know the meaning of that word, that you couldn't do it.
Can you give us an example of what one of those was?
It's really hard to remember right now. Like I said, he had a vision that we did not have at the time.
So in hindsight, what do you think of him?
Oh, he's one of a kind. I mean, I don't know if there is or ever will be another one like him. I think it's unfortunate that the church does not have people like him right now. There were several people who were very much like him at the time who were retired immediately when we got a new bishop. And that most of us felt was unfortunate. Like Father Tom Caralusa, Father Jim Dorgan, Father Mike Hanna. There were a whole group of them that had those visions.
So that's what made him so unique, was his vision.
His vision of the future, and wanting to implement Vatican II. He very much wanted us to move the church forward and get out of the back where we were before. And some people didn't like that. And some people to this day don't like it. I mean, that's why we have a Latin Mass going on somewhere. But he did. He had a vision that was unequaled, I think, by many. And there aren't very many people, like I said, today that have a vision like that, unfortunately.
Very good. Okay, talk about the dedication.
We had a big party, and I mean a party. The sangria was flowing, everything. Well, first of all, we had Mass, of course. The bishop was here to bless everything. And there was a photograph, and goodness knows what happened to this. The tabernacle was in the worship center at the time because we were having Mass. And my husband was taking a lot of pictures in those days. Of course, we got them developed. And over the tabernacle was almost like a picture of Christ, like a shadowy figure. And French took it. I don't know whether he didn't want it public or what, but he took that picture, so I lost it. But we really had a super party, and everybody was having a good time. And that's when I met Marianne DeLuca, who later became one of my best friends. But they had moved here from Ohio. Dick was with Giant Foods, if you remember them, and they had transferred him down here. And he had come early on, and he had been checking out parishes, and he liked this one. So her first encounter with this parish was the night of the dedication. And she had just had a hysterectomy. She didn't feel good. She didn't want to move. She was so angry and so upset. And she came into this place and she just lost it because everybody was so welcoming and having such a good time and so happy about the fact, that we had finally gotten into this building after all that. And the other big event I can remember is Monsignor Mike McCarthy, to this day is my friend. He came to us as a seminarian first, during summer. And then when he became a deacon, transitional deacon, he came for a year. But he became a big part of the parish. And when he was ordained, we had a weekend. His family came in, and on Friday night they had a dinner for the family. Saturday morning, we had 3 buses loaded with parishioners, with Bloody Marys and boxed lunches and the whole 9 yards. And off to Richmond we went. And went in for the ordination, went across the street to the park, spread out our picnic lunches, and just had a ball. So, and then that night there was a big party for him, and then Sunday morning, of course, his first Mass, and another party after the first Mass. We were a bunch of partying people. When he celebrated his first anniversary, again, we took a bus, got a bus, chartered bus. Father Frank Quinn was the pastor. Is it St. Peter? The church in Petersburg, anyway.
St. Joseph?
Maybe it is St. Joseph in Petersburg, and that's where Mike was. He was associate there. So we connected with Father Quinn to find out which Mass he'd be doing. And Mike would have this thing about getting up in front of the congregation before Mass, warming them up with singing and whatever. So he's standing there in front of singing. The parishioners knew we were coming too, so they had planned a big lunch. They also had spaced people out to make sure we had seats. And so he's standing up there singing away, and all of a sudden this busload of people comes walking in and really surprised him. And again, we had a big party. So that was part of, we knew how to celebrate, not only on Sundays, but all the time. And I think that was a very important part of this parish.
I imagine this, I envision just a lot of young families with lots of children in this at that time.
We were.
Lots of kids.
Yeah. I had 3 who were, the first one was a freshman in high school. The second one was in junior high. At the time we didn't have the middle school thing. And the youngest one was in 5th grade. And so most of them were in that ballpark. We had 1 older parishioner, and that was it. And so consequently, we had a lot of baptisms and First Communions and parties. And then, of course, as we got older, things kind of changed, and kids grew up. But a lot of our kids are here. My parish has had 5 generations in this parish. My father was a parishioner. And then there was me, my children, my daughter Ann, who passed away, was very influential in the social ministry. She started the homeless program. So all my children have been involved. The other 2 don't live here any longer. And now my grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I have great-grandchildren here. One of them will make First Communion this month. But, and one of them made it last year. Yeah, Jacob made it last year.
And Josh is coming in?
And Josh is making it this year. Kimberly and her sister Sarah were baptized here, made first Eucharist here, were confirmed here, and were married here. So they have had all of their sacraments in this parish.
That might be, you might be the family with the most generations.
I think so.
here. I bet you are, 5. Wow.
My father was a member of Sacred Heart, and he started coming for special events and fell in love with the parish. And so he just moved over here.